Right now, we're headed to our top story of the day, where Kodiak Robotics is making some strides in road mapping technology. And Alan Adler, who, of course, has his finger on the pulse of all things robotics and autonomous vehicles, is joining us this morning. Alan, talk to us a little bit about Kodiak's road mapping initiative and why even bother remapping roads in the first place.
Well, think about this. I don't imagine either of you probably remember the days when you would go on vacation with your family and somebody would be the navigator, of course, in the front seat, either mom or dad, probably mom. And they would pull out the map, the folding map, right? And they would try to figure out where they were. Well, the only thing that's really on those maps are the highways and where they go. You don't have all of the other things like, what trees are along the side of the road, where the gas stations are, things like that. So there's two kinds of mapping that are involved with autonomous trucking. One is called high definition mapping. That's where you take sort of everything that happens within like 5 centimeters on the left there in the blue map. Everything that could possibly be known about that road is drawn into and captured for that map. The idea is that it's an assist, really, because you have vision systems in autonomous trucks, just like we have our eyes and we go on what we see. This map is to help the truck, figure out where it is. It's really important to have that kind of blue map that you see there in an urban area where there's, a lot of changes and things like that and different stuff. When you get out to the highway on the right there and you see just those red lines, you might be in one place on the road and it would be no different from another place on the road. Let's say you're traveling out west on Interstate 10, maybe through Arizona or New Mexico or Texas. It doesn't change much from place to place. So Kodiak's approach is, let's do lightweight, or what they call sparse mapping, and we're just going to take care of what the road looks like and where the road changes, where the maybe the exits are and the curvature and things like that. This is very simple. It only takes one pass of the road to record that. And then after they quality check it, they can put their trucks out there. Now, of course, those trucks are still supervised by humans at this point, but they can run all the way from, in this case, San Francisco to Jacksonville, Florida, on just having looked at this road in a sparse kind of way. They don't do urban driving, these autonomous trucks or anything like that. And the driving that they do when they get off the road, say to go to a depot or to a transfer point, those roads are relatively easy to maneuver, at least according to Don Burnett, who's the CEO at Kodiak, and he's got a lot of experience in this space. So how did this all play out for them? Was they just did a 5,600 mile run, 5,600 miles run for a company called 10 Roads Express. They're a big carrier of mail, U.S. mail, across the country, and they did a whole lot of stops and pickups and things like that across about 14 hours. I think that it took them to do this. Would have taken much longer if you had, human drivers running the trucks and having to stop for breaks and, paying attention to hours of service rules and things like that. So it's just an interesting approach. It may not be the exact one, but it's certainly an interesting approach to how to make some of this mapping simpler, but still effective.
Now, zooming in on the mapping, is that something where, are there not a lot of, I'm assuming, commercial map data providers that have that level of granularity? Or is that something that we're having to see like Kodiak and these other autonomous manufacturers or makers, they have to almost do it themselves to get what information they need?
Pretty much have to do it themselves, Thomas. It's one of these things that, I remember back in my General Motors days, they were doing mapping, with cars and cameras and everything. And they were literally mapping for what became known as Super Cruise, which was a Cadillac technology, kind of a level 2 autonomy, light autonomy that is, now becoming more prevalent across GM products. But the mapping is very, very time consuming. Some of these other companies, according to Burnett, have hundreds of people involved in this. He said, we can do it, with a truck, with 2 people. We don't need chase vehicles. We don't need additional vehicles and things like that. Now, of course, the first question that comes up is, well, is this safe? Well, he said, here's the thing about a high definition map. It is great until the moment it's finished, and then it's obsolete. All you need is one thing to change, and that map is no longer as valuable. Now, it's interesting. There's some other companies like Embark Trucks, which is doing, they have a technology where they can actually watch the road change. They track the changes in the road in real time, which is another approach that the autonomous trucking companies are looking at. So it's something that, there's a number of different ways to ultimately solve this. We're not there yet because, there's also been some attention this week, as you may have seen it. It was a Too Simple crash. It was not a bad thing. No one was hurt. And I understand from Too Simple that the system wasn't even on when it happened. But one of their trucks, one of their upfit Navistar trucks, ran into a median, and it has become something of a internet sensation this week. Again, nobody hurt. And when you think about the fact of, how many crashes are involved with, human-driven trucks, it's hard to get excited about this. But because it's new and because it's autonomy, it's raising the question of, well, how can we be sure this will be safe? Well, I think ultimately it's going to be a lot safer than having humans behind the wheel, because these autonomous systems don't get tired and they don't get fatigued and they don't get distracted. So,
Alan, you mentioned the point of that once a map is finished, it's obsolete because the road has changed already, right? And with Kodiak, we know that they're making these supervised runs. I guess my question is kind of a two-part. Are we going to be seeing these trucks now taking these measurements and doing this mapping at every single time they're making that run on that lane? Like, I think of a lot of them operating in Texas, right? And the running joke in Texas is that if you drive on I-35, you're going to hit construction because it's been under construction since 1991. But that's not a lie. It literally, like, at least some point of I-35 has been under construction for nearly 30 years. So are these trucks, as they're running, still going to continue to be taking these measurements? Or is that just way too much data to be pulling in at all times?
Yeah, of course, you can't account for, with mapping, you can't account for construction zones, right? I mean, that's something that's going to pop up. And Kodiak a while back said that they could, in fact, pull their trucks over. And because, again, they have vision systems and they can, through the LiDARs and the radars and the cameras, they can see out several hundred meters ahead. So if there's a construction zone that's sort of popped up and they didn't know it was there, the truck will react to that. So it not only will it do that, but if there's a problem where the truck, this is another sort of announcement that they made a few weeks ago, they claim being first, they really weren't, but the idea that if the truck encountered a problem while it was in autonomous mode, it would pull itself over to the side of the road and wait for help. So these are all separate things, but they are all based in the vision part of autonomy rather than the mapping part. Again, there are some companies that don't map at all and just count on the cameras and the LiDARs, to tell them what's going on around them as well as what's ahead of them. So the mapping, it's hard to say where it's going to fit in long term, but the idea that you would have a map almost as a backup, really, more than as a primary way of driving is something that I think Kodiak's got to look at and saying, okay, how much do you really need here? I mean, we often hear about over-engineering things. Is high-definition mapping over-engineering? It might be.
And thinking about that, especially with the LiDAR arrays, is that kind of like the holy grail where we could potentially do real-time mapping in addition to that LiDAR thing, and then you could become the seller of the map information? I know with 5G, we're fixing some of these bandwidth limitations, but is there a potential gold mine in potentially taking that extra effort and having that map data to sell to other autonomous makers?
Well, I don't know how many of these startups are worrying about marketing, what they're working on. I think it's still R&D for them. But there are companies out there that do mapping that, obviously are doing it, just the same way you harvest data from, where we search on our phones. But the idea being that there are companies, I think, Thomas, that do that. I don't think these autonomous companies necessarily are into that right now because, again, they're just trying to, get their businesses going. And so it's a single purpose kind of thing. I guess the question I would ask is one person's high definition map good enough for someone else to use? Maybe that is the question you're asking. Hard to know at this point because, again, Too Simple, for example, has mapped I don't have the current number, but it's getting close to 10,000 miles of highways in the country that they've actually done high def maps for. But again, they do it based on where they think those routes are going to go. And I think when you look at the routing for autonomous trucks, it's going to be, freight dense routes and things like that, hub to hub kind of approaches. You might see a variety of mapping out there, both, for, I think what Kodiak's working on is kind of that long haul kind of approach, where you're just going to, truck's going to take off and it's going to pull over when it needs fuel. And maybe if you're still in going to be with supervised human drivers for a while, got to change drivers, that kind of thing. But I feel like over time, it's going to get very specific on certain routes. And that's where this autonomous freight network that Too Simple talks about, they're mostly concerned with mapping those routes that they plan to be on continually.
You know what the best part about an autonomous mapped truck is?
What?
It never says no to stopping to ask for directions.
It doesn't complain about that.
It doesn't complain about asking for directions. Alan, thank you for joining us this morning. Great to have you as always. We'll talk to you tomorrow for our edition of Truck Tech.